Hello, my name is Pak Chi Lau. I'm a documentary photographer. For the last 40 years, the theme of my work is Chinese migration. I graduated from high school in 1969, and I did not want to work in a factory. My parents borrowed $700 and I went to Canada. It was a ticket to get out of Hong Kong. I was supposed to go to school in Toronto, but I really had no money. I ended up working in a Chinese restaurant kitchen in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Many old-timer Chinese taught me how to cook chop suey, chow mein, wonton soup. Well, they have been there for a century. I often wondered, how did they end up working in that corner of the world? That was the origin of my work. Around 1996, a photojournalist friend, Richard Gwynn, showed me pictures of Cuban Chinese in Havana, Chinatown. I have been in 30-some countries and have never heard of a Chinatown in Cuba. Well, with Richard's urging and guiding, we went in April 2009. I was hooked. I went back in July the same year. So here it is. As early as 1860, Chinese laborers were hired to work in sugarcane fields among African slaves in Cuba. They soon established Chinese clan associations in towns wherever there was a large Chinese population. Within decades, they started vegetable farms, grocery stores, laundry business, and restaurants, like most Chinatown in other parts of the world. In Havana, Chinatown, there is only one short block full of restaurants. Most of them sell pizza. Local tells me that under communism, that there are no incentives, no materials, no money, no Chinese chefs, and no freedom. There are a handful of tourists, but I don't see any Chinese. Now most of the Chinese are gone. The neighborhood is no longer showing the signs that there were once Chinese there. You have to look really, really hard, because this closed door means that the Chinese have died off. Kind of desolate and depressing. On the third day, I find some at the Longgong Association. It is a clan association where some old Chinese and their mixed-race descendants get their free meals. They come here every morning, standing in line, and get mostly rice and beans. What is surprising is that they carry containers and put the food in there first. Then they eat the last portion. They need help feeding their family and children. I feel rather depressed to see that these elderly in their 70s and 80s have to live like this. Is this the Cuban Golden Mountain? They say that Cuba is poor. In Chinese homes, there is no soy sauce. There is something wrong in a country that, for Chinese, there is not enough money to buy soy sauce. Since Chinese migration has stopped, there is no more trade industries, import and export businesses. To me, that's regretful. They say 25% of Cuban population have Chinese blood. So I was curious. It turned out that when the Chinese married a Cuban woman, their children would use the Cuban mother's maiden name. In other words, the Chinese would become diluted in a way that the children don't look like Chinese anymore, and they've lost their Chinese last name, and the history of Chinese would be of the past. You would not be able to recognize any trace in the Cuban family after 1 or 2 generations. Quite a few Cuban Chinese families. What impressed me most was how they longed to have a connection with the Chinese family. Some of them cried because they missed their father and their grandfather so much. And they remembered that when they were young, how hard the Chinese fathers and grandfather had worked. Long hours in the grocery store, ironing shirts, washing laundry for the customers. And they remember sending money home to the Chinese families. But because the migration had stopped and no one could speak Chinese, or the Chinese in China don't speak Spanish, they've lost that connection. I feel kind of sad because some of them literally cried. So I used the ancestry photograph and asked them to put that in front of their heart to have their portraits taken. Before Cuba turned communist, Chinatown had a flourishing culture. It had 4 Chinese newspapers, bookstores, tailors, barbecue and noodle shops, banquets with cuisines, 4 theaters, and 4 Cantonese opera troupes touring major cities in Cuba. Well, it had a nightlife like New York City. Let me introduce you to the remaining stars I found in Havana. When I first met Caridad Amarant, I had no idea she was a singer. She was using a toothbrush dipped in kerosene, cleaning off the grease on lead pipes. She got $10 for 100 hours a month. 你寫埋你個名。